Good afternoon. Welcome to the first of this new format of videos that I'll be doing. I don't really have a name for them yet. I used to be doing Lawyer Live when I was doing Facebook Live video, but this isn't live, so maybe we'll just stick with Lawyer Notes. And if anybody out there has a good suggestion for a title for these videos, shoot them my way. Anyway, wanted to tell everybody, this is Matt the Lawyer. I am Matt Johnston, the proprietor of the law offices of Matthew S. Johnston, LLC. You can go check me out at mattthelawyer.com, and you can check out my website there. Today I wanted to talk a little bit about contracts. It's something that I'm doing a lot on, spending a lot of time working on contracts, spending a lot of time redrafting contracts, studying contracts, working on some new stuff that'll be coming out hopefully by the end of the year or at the beginning of next. What I wanted to talk about was some quick and dirty tips to tell whether or not your contract, the contract that you're looking at, is a quality piece of contract drafting. By quality, I mean, is it written in clear English? Is it something that you can understand? Is it something that you can read without pulling your hair out? Is it, more importantly, something that your clients can read without having to pull their hair out, or without having to spend a huge amount of money on a lawyer to read it? So, a few quick and dirty tips. Number one, the shall substitution. If y'all remember way back in the day, when you took algebra, you learned how to substitute certain information into a quadratic equation or what have you and figure out what's going on. Well, the shall substitution works pretty much the same way. For every time you see the word shall in a contract, I want you to substitute the words has a duty to. Okay? Every time you see shall, interpret it as has a duty to. Shall is the single most overused and abused word in contract drafting. Not sure how it started, but it's there. When you're reading through, some of my pet shall statements are shall be required to. Party A shall be required to do X. Well, if you substitute and it says party A has a duty to be required to, it sounds pretty ludicrous and it doesn't come across particularly well. That's where the shall substitution will help you understand whether or not it makes sense. We'll talk some other time about shalls, but work with the shall substitution. It'll make your life a little bit easier. The next up is the readability issue. Okay. I have come to the conclusion that most contracts are simply not readable. They're not readable by other lawyers, and they're certainly not going to be readable by the people who have to use the contracts day in and day out. Part of that has to do with how it is drafted. Not the language that's used, but the wording that's used, the sentence structure that's used. You'll see run-on sentences. You will see multiple prepositional phrases. You'll see multiple independent clauses jammed into a sentence. The result is you get a lot of sentences that you cannot simply understand. You can't break them down. That's where readability comes into play. So how can you tell if you've got a readable contract? Well, take a chunk of contract, 250 words, what have you, count the sentences. All right? Then count the number of words in that whole passage. If you're using Microsoft Word or some other word processing software, it will help you do that a lot easier because you can just block a whole bunch of text and find out the numbers. Then do the math. Divide the number of words by the number of sentences, and you'll get some sort of number. If that number is greater than 20, as a rule, you're probably in the world of unreadability. What you're really looking at is an average sentence length. There are going to be times when sentences are going to be longer, and that's okay. But if every sentence is 25, 35, 45, 55 words, you're not going to be able to parse it. You're not going to be able to understand it. And that becomes an issue because the more words per sentence you have, the more likely it is that somebody is simply not going to understand it. And if your clients can't understand it, and if you can't understand it, then you need to tell your lawyer, fix it. Write it in a better way. There's really no hard and fast rule, but The American Press Institute, which studies newspapers and stuff like that, said that a sentence length of more than 43 means that only 10% of what is read is going to be retained. So maybe 4 words out of that sentence, maybe 6 words. You're simply not going to have enough. So, readability is a concern. Finally, I want to give you what I call the efforts test. Efforts are kind of fun. You go into a contract and a party may be required to expend certain kinds of efforts to get something done. Let's say party A shall use some sort of efforts to accomplish task B. Fine. Oftentimes you will see all kinds of adjectives and modifiers of the word efforts. You'll see reasonable efforts, that's a good one. You'll see best efforts, you'll see commercially reasonable efforts. I've even seen one that says commercially reasonable best efforts. Not quite sure what that means. But I will tell you this, the courts don't care. Your clients don't care. What matters is the effort reasonable in the context? So, take your contract and search for the word efforts and find out how many different modifiers are being used. See, that's where the real problem is. If everything was commercially reasonable best efforts, while I might have a quibble about the choice of the words in the standard, I'm not going to have a particular problem with the fact that it's consistent. Whether the court will enforce it or what that means is a different question, but at least it's consistent. So many times I will read a contract and that efforts will be all over the map. 3, 4, 5, 6 different modifiers to the word efforts. That's a sign of inconsistency. It's a sign of lack of understanding of what's going on. And it's a sign that the contract drafter has gotten a little lazy. They're not paying attention to the entire draft of the agreement. So they get a little muddled. And then, if you're ever in a dispute, you have no idea what the standard is. You have no clue what a court is going to do. Because if you have reasonable best efforts over here and commercially reasonable best efforts, what does that mean? Clearly the parties intended it to mean something different, but the court isn't going to have any idea. So hopefully you never end up in a dispute with that particular contract, but always be thinking about it. Okay, so those are 3 quick and dirty tips that will give you an idea of whether or not you need to address and revamp your contract because you need to make it understandable. Remember the Shadow Substitution. It is one of the most helpful tools you will ever have. Remember, sentence length matters. You should be shooting for somewhere between 15 and 22 words or so on average in your contract. And finally, take a look at that efforts standard. How many different standards are being applied? In the meantime, hopefully I'll be doing these a little bit more regularly, and you're going to see them on YouTube. You can go to YouTube. Hey, I got a YouTube channel. And you can also go see them on Facebook. In the meantime, this is Matt the Lawyer signing out. I'll talk to y'all later.